There we go. Okay, so thank you for the introduction. I think that the first topic that we had to speak of today was where we came from, and that's already been done for me, so thank you. I'm a physicist by trade. Yeah, it's great, yeah. But I decided during the process of being a researcher and everything that there are a lot of things that we can do to improve the way we communicate, evaluate, and also discuss the research that's going on in the world today. One of the key components of what we do as researchers and also as publishers is peer review. And I really see peer review as the central place, as having a central role in what we do as researchers and publishers. And so looking at that process and what it was like to go through the process as a researcher, we really figured that that was the thing that we wanted to speed up, and that at Publons is really our mission. How can we speed up science by harnessing peer review? To take a step back and look at the way academics work, really there's two things that you try to do. The first is to publish new and novel research after discovering it, doing the research itself. And then your other job is also to interpret other research, evaluate, to review it. And there's historically, for the last 350, 400 years, been a nice trade-off between those two, an interplay between the two things. But the way the incentive structures have developed, really over the last century in particular, is that we've reached a point where there's a massive pressure to publish, but very, very little incentive to review. So things have swung heavily towards where, as a researcher, what you really want to do is publish papers, and peer review takes a back seat. Now, they're both critical components, and that imbalance leads to a few problems. On the publishing side, lots of submissions all the time, always increasing. An increasing number of rejections because researchers want to publish in the most prestigious journal they can publish in. We're starting to see various instances of reviewer fraud. Then on the review side, it's actually quite hard to find and motivate reviewers. And most reviewers will receive many, many requests to review, many more than is actually possible to do over time. So what we're trying to do with Publons is solve some of these problems, swing the balance back. So there's a nice even combination of peer review and publishing in your research activities. And the first step towards doing that is to provide an incentive to want to review. So the first thing we've done with Publons is give researchers a cross-publisher way to get recognition for peer review. So what we have here is a profile from Stephen Roberts, one of our Publons users. You can see, standard profile, but down the bottom we have the places that he's reviewed for, and also a record of his pre-publication reviews that he's done in the past. One of the nice things you can see too is there's a green tick by all of these reviews, which means that we've worked behind the scenes to get some evidence or some verification that these reviews actually happened. So even though all of these reviews, except for this one here, are blind and unpublished, so there's no evidence about what paper Stephen reviewed or the content of the review displayed on Publons, we've still been able to verify in the background that these reviews happened. That's a critical component of what we do. And this actually turns out to be very motivating. So there's a couple of my favorite tweets ever where Stephen talks about how now that he's getting credit for this stuff, he actually really engages the process and he feels like he does a better job of reviewing. And that's a general piece of feedback that we've received, where people generally say that, I do a lot of this work and now I have a way to get recognition for it. And so when I do things like my annual performance review, I will include my Publons peer review profile in that thing. So really moving towards turning peer review into something that you can be proud of and want to do more of, and a better job of as well. So how do we do that? There's really two ways to get reviews onto the platform. Reviewers themselves can add them manually. We also integrate with publishers. Either case, we pull them into the platform, we curate them, we index them, and we verify them. And then we can do some cool things with them. So we generate reviewer profiles, like I mentioned. There's various sorts of information we can start to extract from the reviews that I'll get into in a little bit. And then we're also starting to roll out a range of tools for editors, because the unspoken thing here is that, yes, publishing is really important and reviewing is really important, but the people that facilitate this are publishers and editors. So how can we help them to better engage with their reviewers and speed up the process that way? So where have we got to with this? We really kicked off this aspect of Publons a little over 2 years ago now. The first academic publishing conference I went to was APE 2 years ago, so there you go. Now we're well over 50,000 reviewers, about 250,000 reviews, maybe a little bit more, across 7,000 to 10,000 different journals. And each week we add, it fluctuates, but certainly more than 5,000 reviews each week. And the cool thing is, it depends on how you estimate the sort of review activity that happens around the world, but roughly about 1% of the world's reviews that were performed last year came onto Publons, which I thought was a cool number. I said we integrate with various publishers. Here are some of the people that we work with. Together across all of these journals, we have well over 100 journals that integrate directly into Publons. So I'll get into what that means in a minute, but suffice to say, reviewers get automatic recognition, and there's really various ways to engage with reviewers during the before, during, and after the peer review process when you integrate with Publons. So a few more specifics on what this means for researchers. Here's another profile. Elsie Bick, a researcher out of Stanford. Very, very similar. You can also see here some editorial activity, a list of the places where you've reviewed, and again, a long list. So these are just reviews from August 2015 when I took the screenshot. But this list will stretch back years. Many reviewers have contributed a lot of reviews over time. Some other features I want to point out. We also try to support ORCID as much as we can. So anybody who signs up to the system has an easy way to excuse me, associate their research with their ORCID as well. And I'll get to that in a little bit more detail soon too. The other thing we do is we provide all sorts of stats for researchers. It's great to get formal recognition and everything, but one of the things that people really engage with is just knowing what's happening when you do these reviews. So we have all sorts of things, like we can show you the impact factor of the journal that you reviewed for. It's kind of some sort of cumulative chart. Various metrics like the percent of your reviews that are open, that sort of stuff. But there's other things as you go below the fold, and you can go and see this for any researcher on Publons, like what day of the week do you do your reviews? And you start to see some really interesting behavior. So for example, some reviewers do all of their work on a Sunday. Others do all of it on a Wednesday. So it's interesting to see how people do these things. And it's a really engaging feature, so that's why I put it up here. There's also the formal recognition component. So one of the things that we have is the ability to download a PDF of only your verified reviews, the ones that we've specifically been able to verify. And it doesn't look that great screenshot and put up here, but once you download this, it comes out as a nice 1 or 2 page PDF that you can use. And then various things like, let's give you a way to add this to your LinkedIn, and that's all kind of in place now. Then there are various rankings, so you can go and look at top reviewers according to different fields. So in my field, about 6 months ago, I was there at the top. Now I can't even find myself on the list, so it's pretty cool. And then you can go and look at different institutions, who's contributing the most reviews, the most merit, all these sorts of things. So I guess lots of ways to turn review into something that's interesting and people engage with and care about. Then what does this mean for publishers? How do we work with publishers? So I really look at it through 3 different lenses. There's ways to recognize reviewers, there's ways to engage with reviewers, and then finally there's ways to understand, to use the review that you have in your system to understand what's going on. So I'll speak a little bit to each of those things, but first of all, the thing that we do is we hook into the editorial management system of a given journal, and every time a review happens, the reviewer is given an option whether they want to have credit on Publons. If they do, the review is automatically transferred and the review automatically gets recognition, verified recognition. That leads to all sorts of nice things. So as you start to collect a profile of reviews, we have a very easy way for you to export that record to ORCID. So if you go into your profile, there's a button, You can click a tick here, which says automatically export my reviews to ORCID, and this turns into this. So again, moving more and more towards turning peer review into a verified, measurable research output. I spoke a little bit about engagement. One of the things we do is we try to heavily use publisher branding, where we have these formal partnerships. So I've got 2 examples of emails here. This is an invitation to get credit for your review on Publons. And here is something we're actually working on now, which is once the manuscript that you reviewed is published, if and when it's published, we'll wait a few weeks and then we'll contact the reviewer and just say, hey, by the way, the manuscript that you reviewed has been published. And it turns out, we've been trialing this. This is a very, very good way to engage the reviewers who at some point will become the researchers and the people that are discussing the research that publishers are producing. So it's something we're quite excited about. Then on to the understanding aspect. So, thank you. Fake journal, the Journal of Applied Publons. This is not a journal. Publons is not going to become a publisher. But what we have is the way for publishers and administrators to jump in and see what's happening on that platform. So there's a summary page that really anybody can get access to. Given a nice summary over the last year, how many reviewers and reviews were added to the platform, some nice bar charts, and then a whole section on the privacy settings for that journal, which is important, and I'll spend 30 seconds talking about that. But it allows us to answer for publishers on this dashboard all sorts of questions. Where do our reviewers come from? This is an example of a very Asia-centric journal. Where else do they publish? We can show similarities between various other journals. Who are they? Who else should I be considering as a reviewer? Can I trust this reviewer? So as part of this whole process, we have a big database of reviewers and where they've come from, where their review activity has been. And we also, it turns out, have a lot of different email addresses. So reviewers will add 3 or 4 email addresses during this process. So you can imagine if you have a Gmail account or a Hotmail account, you can put into Publons, and we'll tell you what we know about that reviewer, and also their formal contact, their preferred way of being contacted. Quick note on privacy. We are trying very hard to get this exactly right. There are a lot of stakeholders, and we put a lot of effort into it. Publons now I think, incorporates the position of all the stakeholders. So we take into account the manuscript publication status, whether it is not yet published, whether it's been rejected, published somewhere else, or whether it's been published, the preference of the reviewer, the author, and the journal. All these things are factored into what information we display about a review, whether it's the content or allowing people to sign their review. So here's 2 examples. Here's what a reviewer can choose, whether they want to sign their name to a review, whether they want to publish the review content. But authors can also come onto Publons and choose whether they want the content of the reviews of their manuscripts to be displayed. But all of this is moderated by journal preference as well. So journals can also set a base level of what reviewers can do on the platform. And here's some examples. Completely blind, unpublished review policy. These are all active on the site. Completely open policy. And kind of a weird policy where you can publish your reviews, you can sign your reviews, but you can only sign or publish reviews that are actually published, of manuscripts that are actually published in that journal. So Cascade is locked out there. If you're interested in learning more, it's 10 minutes, so I went pretty quickly. Go to this URL, publons.com/partner. Most of Publons is just it's focused on researchers, but we do have this whole segment of the site where we can, teach you a little bit more. And with that, I will say thank you very much.